So there's a pride of ownership that comes with it. And when they see not only that they've created this thing from scratch, but when they see other people around the table enjoying it, it really elevates their spirits when it comes to going through this process. And they want to get in on the fun of enjoying the food as well as cooking the food.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Gretchen Rowe, and it's my delight to welcome you to the Demi Learning Show. I am so delighted to welcome Angela today to talk about Inquisicook. We met last year in Texas at a homeschool conference, and I have waited for months to be able to do this episode with her because food is the language of love, and she brings so much to the table. And I'm going to let her give you her background.
A big thank you to you, Gretchen, and to Demi Learning for hosting me today. I too have been looking forward to this for months. You've been such an enthusiastic supporter of our concept, and I can't wait to share it with your community. Inquisicook is my company. It was founded, well, I'll tell you the background of that. I live with my husband just outside of Athens, Georgia. We have 4 children and 11 grandchildren. We started homeschooling in 1992, and we continued all the way until the last one left for college. When that youngest one was about, I don't remember the exact age, 9 years old or so, she wanted cooking to be one of her school subjects. Of course, we were already cooking together just as a matter of lifestyle, but she wanted it to be an official subject. And I said, okay, we will do that, but we are going to make it the science of cooking. I just really never understood why the science that's right under our noses was never a part of official science curricula. So I thought I was going to go out and buy a few books, reel in a few resources, and be off to the races. And as it turns out, that was not the case. Of course, this was in the earlier days of homeschooling, so there weren't quite as many options as there are now. But the things that I did find were just not a good fit for homeschooling. Some of them were just like random acts of science that didn't really translate to a longer term objective in the kitchen. Some of them were a little too quirky for my taste, just like a very narrow breadth of what was covered. Some of them were too complex. And so all of it and everything that I had was going to have to be translated down to lesson plans and lessons and ways to measure progress and put together in a way that achieved comprehensive learning. And I decided that if I couldn't find what I wanted, that I would create what I wanted.
The true mark of a homeschool mom.
There you go. Exactly. We're nothing if not innovative, all right? So it took a very long time. It took a long time for me to finish homeschooling my own kids and get in gear as an empty nester, which is what I did. So I didn't get it done in time for that child, but I did get it done in time for my grandchildren. And now my grandkids are some of my best cooking buddies. We have a great time in the kitchen. And it's just been a joy to share this with the homeschooling community and be so well received and see so many families that are really interested in returning to having a knowledge of what's going into your food, having control over what's put onto the table, and also achieving scientific literacy as a part of everyday life.
Well, I think one of the things that drew me to your concept in Texas was my adult daughter who was with me at that conference. She's an amateur chef, and she was wildly excited that you had connected the dots between science and cooking, and that made such a tremendous difference. And she was the one who said, "You have to go talk to this lady." And from there, it's been a serendipitous relationship. So tell me now, a little bit. You have a presentation. Why don't we launch into that and let you we're gonna pray over the technology a little bit today, because those of you who are joining us live, it has been an adventure.
Okay, I'm just going to give a brief overview of our guiding principles in Inquisicook before I go into that. We focus on scratch made cooking with real ingredients. So, in our recipes, there's no refrigerated biscuit dough, there's no cans of cream of mushroom soup. Not that we're necessarily opposed to that, it's just not what we want to teach. We focus on family-friendly recipes that you'll be glad to see on the table. We don't go in for gimmicks, we don't make things that fizz and bubble for the sake of fizzing and bubbling. We don't do edible slime. We do try to get a balance between savory and sweet. Of course, a lot of students, they just want to start baking cookies and pies and muffins, and we do that. But we also bring in the proteins, the vegetables, the starches, and teach them the science of that so they can cook a wide breadth of options.
Do you find that if a child is engaged in the cooking process, they're more likely to eat what they have prepared?
100%. So there's a pride of ownership that comes with it. And when they see not only that they've created this thing from scratch, but when they see other people around the table enjoying it, it really elevates their spirits when it comes to going through this process. And they want to get in on the fun of enjoying the food as well as cooking the food.
Well, I know that from a personal experience because I taught all 6 of my kids to cook, and they're all terrific cooks, which has been a tremendous blessing for me. And I often say to parents, when you have a child who eats a very limited menu, if you can get their buy-in to prepare the food, you're more likely to get them to try the food.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. We also keep things budget friendly, so we don't call for exotic ingredients that you would have to order from a specialty store or expensive ingredients that you would not be able to feed, let's say, a family of six with. And we are averse to waste. So we try to minimize waste. In fact, we go to great lengths on that. Most of our lab materials are food that wind up as a prepared dish on the table. So instead of doing a science experiment and then throwing everything away, the science experiment becomes part of the food preparation process.
And
So
I
we
bet I speak for every homeschool mom who says, if I could get my kids to help me cook dinner, it would change the game entirely.
yeah, it absolutely will. And I will give you some tips and share some ideas on how to make that a smooth transition to start involving them in that process. With that, I will go ahead and get started. I'm going to share um, ways that you can use culinary science starting tomorrow if you wanted to, without having to go to any great lengths and buy a bunch of books or educate yourself on the front end. You can just make it a natural process. And here we go. A lot of people don't know where to begin. There's so much information out there. There's so much science. There's so many recipes, and everybody's constantly making noise on the internet about do this, do this. So I recommend starting with the familiar. So, for instance, you could just go to your refrigerator and open it up and see if it inspires any questions. Have your kids go to the refrigerator. Is there anything in there that you're curious about? On our blog, the page that gets the most traffic is an entry that I wrote on the coating on free shredded cheese. So we get all of these random visitors to the website because people are Googling what is the coating that's on free shredded cheese. So there's a lot of curiosity waiting to be explored inside your refrigerator. For instance, why do cucumbers last so much longer than pickle? Why do pickles last so much longer than cucumbers? What is the science that causes them to be edible for so much longer? What is that gray stuff on the outside of ground beef after a few days? Does that deteriorate the quality? Does it mean that it's spoiled? Is it safe to eat? You could also do forensics on a less than perfect outcome of your own cooking. Why is my meatloaf so dry? What is that white gelatinous stuff that forms on salmon sometimes when you bake it or can sear it? You can do sensory evaluations on the foods that you're already cooking. Now, sensory evaluations are a core part of Inquisicook. They sit down with their families and evaluate their results. They rate them based on appearance, flavor, texture, and aroma. We ask them to be specific about their responses. So, this not only causes students to think critically and analytically about their outcomes. It also gives them a pathway to craft improvements or variations for future attempts at the recipe. So, if they would prefer that the cookies be crisper or they would rather have pecans in the macaroons instead of coconut, they can jot that down and this becomes a learning journal for the student. So, one option would be to take something that you're already preparing, have everybody in the family do a sensory evaluation, and then find ways that you could alter it for future attempts at that recipe and then bring that into your process.
That's wonderful and really amazing, and you know what? We should be seeking feedback from our kids, although that's a two-edged sword in my family, because everybody has an opinion. I've given birth to 6 firstborn children, so
Well, it also gives us an opportunity of how to graciously accept criticism or less than glowing comments. So that's something that students really need to learn that every comment can't be glowing positivity. Sometimes we have to grow when we get feedback that's not great.
absolutely. We cooked a recipe on Sunday night that, we were less than impressed with, and I'll leave out the details, but my son said, "Mom, you've tried 12 recipes from this creator, and 11 of them were home runs. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. This one just didn't work."
That's an excellent point. An excellent point. Another option that is really fun is to explore the perfect version of a favorite dish. And what makes this interesting is that everybody has a different idea of the perfect version of a dish. So, America's favorite comfort food is macaroni and cheese. And there are a lot of variables at play in macaroni and cheese. The most obvious would be your choice of pasta. Do you want typical elbow macaronis? Do you want to go with something else that's tubular but a different shape? Also, the choice of cheese can be explored. Cheese science is very fascinating. Young cheeses have an open protein matrix that melts more easily than aged cheeses. Moist cheeses melt more easily than dry cheeses. So you have some give and take there, but young moist cheeses tend to be less flavorful than dry aged cheeses. So, the flavor difference between a Parmesan and fresh mozzarella is about as far apart as they get. So you have some choices to make on your types of cheese. But the one that I usually focus on is what goes on top of that macaroni and cheese. Should it just be cheese? Or should it be something crunchy, possibly mixed with butter that forms a crumb crust, whether it's potato chips or saltine crackers, goldfish crackers, panko? Um, and when I ask this in workshop audiences, it's usually pretty evenly divided. Now, I'm in team no crust. I think that toasted cheese is one of God's great gifts to the human taste bud. So anything that would interfere with toasting that cheese is a no go for me. And if it's panko, it's a definite no go because I do not understand panko. I know a lot of people like it, and they say, "Oh, it's so crunchy." Yes, like shards of glass or grains of sand. So I don't know if my mouth is too tender for it or what, but yeah, so that's one of my little quirks. But this is something fun to get feedback on the family of how you could alter macaroni and cheese. Another one that's fun is chocolate chip cookies. So some people like them thick and moist and chewy. Some people like them very thin and crispy. And some people like them crispy on the outside, chewy on the inside. So when you learn the science of cookies, which we with Quizcook 2 has a unit on cookies, you come to understand that you can manipulate that texture and thickness through things like using brown sugar instead of white sugar. You can actually use physical force to cause the cookies to deflate during baking, it's called pan banging, where you bang the pan or partially baked cookies so that the leavening kind of collapses in on itself. You can do that repeatedly to get a very crisp cookie. Also, changing the fats drastically changes the texture of a cookie. Versus if you use real butter, if you use margarine, if you use shortening, these all have very different outcomes in terms of cookies. Now, this is a high interest approach. I mean, I can't imagine that a family would say, "Okay, it's time to do science. Let's bake some cookies," and you're gonna get groans.
This is true.
Probably not. And this is another one where it's interesting to try subsequent batches and kind of see how tweaking things, even tweaking, baking powder and baking soda will change the leavening, but also how cookies brown. So there's a lot of fun science available in the cookie realm. Another approach is to go with the seasons. This was one that also becomes somewhat budget friendly in terms of agricultural seasons. Here's an example. This is a centerpiece that I made a few years ago for Easter. And my inspiration was I just had a color story that I knew I wanted to put on the table. I went to the farmer's market and selected all the vegetables that I thought fit into that color story. And then I made the centerpiece. So then after Easter, I still had all of these vegetables available to cook with. So afterwards, you can turn this into science projects. For instance, in this one, the color story could become part of the science story. When you learn about what causes coloration in vegetables, the different antioxidants and anthocyanins and things like that, you can study the science of vegetable color. You can also have classification exercises where you can say, teach about the brassicas, teach about the alliums and the vegetable classifications. Okay, which vegetables in this centerpiece are brassicas, so on and so forth. For younger children, you can turn it into a botany lesson where they're learning to figure out which of these items are stems, which of them are leaves, which of them are fruits. And for instance, the artichokes, that's a flower bud that has not yet formed and bloomed. So they can be learning about the parts of a plant. And then, of course, you can head to the kitchen and prepare them. They get to taste them, they get to see them. The great thing about culinary science is that it does engage all of the senses. And research suggests that the more senses you engage during a learning exercise, the more securely that information sticks in the brain. So, this is one of my favorite agricultural approaches.
I love that. I love the fact that you are creating something creative, but then using it and it's demystifying it for kids, who might never have seen an artichoke.
Also, going with the seasons, there is so much fun science in fruits. We do a strawberry science workshop that is a big, big hit. It's just really fascinating. The same with apples, the same with blueberries. These things come into season. A lot of us have access to You Pick farms. So you can have a little field trip going to the farm and seeing how it grows and taking them home and then delve into the science. Now, some people may be concerned about, like, okay, where do I find the science? It's on the internet. You will not have any problems Googling strawberry science, blueberry science, apple science. You will get the results that you need, and you can give yourself a quick primer, put that together, and have a family fun adventure exploring fruits. I also like to lean into the holidays for themed explorations. Valentine's Day is coming up, and that is a perfect time for chocolate science. For instance, in the center here, we have natural cocoa and Dutch cocoa. And that changes the pH of the cocoa, which changes how you formulate a recipe. So that would be a fun thing to explore the process of how, first of all, how chocolate is made, how it goes from a cacao pod to ready to eat chocolate, exploring the different types of chocolate. What's the difference between white chocolate, milk chocolate, dark chocolate? What happens when you temper chocolate? Why does it become shiny? What is chocolate bloom? If you've ever had chocolate that has that white coating on it, what is that? How does that happen? How do I prevent it? Does it harm anything? You could explore potato science for St. Patrick's Day. We cover this in our starches and sauces unit and in Quizzicook 2. There's tons of interesting science surrounding potatoes. You could also do a little rabbit hole into the Irish potato famine and the causes of that, and teach about the importance of biodiversity and not relying on one varietal of any particular agricultural product and not relying on just one type of food to sustain a community. Easter is a great time to study the science of boiled eggs. And boy, it's a very controversial subject. If you look online or in books, everybody's got an opinion on the best way to cook them and what makes them easiest to peel. So, I put that in with religion and politics of things not to discuss in light company because people get very dogmatic about it.
Absolutely. As somebody who has 60 chickens and I am asked all the time, I say, Go experiment and see what works best for you, because what I do may not work for you." So,
Exactly, exactly. So, when it comes to eggs, certainly why does the white turn from from clear to opaque? What is it that causes that green ring that sometimes forms around the yolk? What is that dimple that forms in the bottom of older eggs when you boil them? Why is that there? And that's just the start. You can go very deep on this. For Cinco de Mayo, you could have a family project of how to engineer the perfect taco. And, if you think about eating tacos, there is something about the eating pleasure that's dependent upon the way that it's formed. Now, when I look at this taco, I think it's a perfectly fine taco. It's certainly photogenic, but that's not the way that I would make a taco because I think those shreds of cheese should be down on top of the warm ground beef. Then I would put the tomatoes on top of the cheese because they're best at room temperature. And then I would put my cold stuff, like probably I would put my lettuce, and then I would use the sour cream as kind of a glue to hold everything in place. Other people might want it differently. If you had soft shells, you could actually do it horizontally where you would have on one half of the taco a layer of everything and then the taco folds over and then you get a bite of everything in every bite, if that makes sense. And then finally the holidays, I mean, I don't even know where to start there, but you could cook your way from Thanksgiving to Christmas. What's the best way to roast a turkey? Should you stuff it? Should you not stuff it? Should you brine it? Go into the science of sauces. You've got yeast breads that are usually a part of that. You could also investigate a phenomenon. And my favorite one is popcorn. What causes popcorn to pop? There's a certain amount of moisture percentage that has to be in that popcorn. You heat it to a certain degree, certain temperature. Then that gelatinizes the starches. They puff up. It splits the kernel. There's 300 pounds of pressure in a popcorn kernel that's popping. And there are all kinds of learning extensions that can go along with this. You can investigate the smoke point of oils. You can investigate what makes a good topping that will make sprinkle on stick without making the popcorn soggy. And again, popcorn is almost a universal favorite. And it's inexpensive. Now I'm going to share just some teaching tips to help the process go well very quickly. I encourage you to build good habits from the start, practice good kitchen safety, teach them to turn pot handles in, to not have appliance cords dangling down where they might get snagged on a drawer, wipe up spills quickly, so on and so forth. Pay attention to food safety. Keep cold foods cold and hot foods hot. Avoid cross contamination. Label things clearly when they go into the refrigerator and freezer. Teach kids to handle knives with precision and care. Show them a proper grip.
I think some of those things that you're identifying are things many of us as moms do intuitively, but it's really helpful to have them pointed out to us if we haven't thought about it.
Teach them to clean up after themselves and to do a proper job of it. If they're kind of doing it halfway, gently correct them because it will really pay off in the long run. And finally, mise en place. So this is a method where everything is measured out and prepared in advance of the actual assembly process. I know it sounds like a big hassle, and you do have a few more dishes to wash, but kids are not as good as multitasking as they think they are. And this will make it a lot less likely that they grab salt instead of sugar or baking powder instead of baking soda or don't have a spatula at the moment that it's time to flip an egg. And now, finally, I want to move on to deciding on your methods. We try to take abstract concepts and make them concrete by creating models, usually using food. This is a model of how emulsifiers work. I will spare you the details, but if you just Google emulsifier diagram, you'll see an explanation of how emulsifiers work. We teach this in our salads and dressings unit. And usually we come up with our models by looking at diagrams, scientific diagrams, and saying, how can I recreate that with food? So it becomes three-dimensional and it becomes tasty. In this particular instance, we use these ingredients to create a salad with an emulsified dressing after we're done. We're also big on narration. We think that it's a great diagnostic tool for parents to find out if students have understood what they've learned. So, for instance, if you were to ask me about a spark plug and how it works, I would say it's a plug and it sparks and it has something to do with combustion engines. If you ask my husband how spark plugs work, he could give you the full story and explain way more than you ever wanted to know. And that's just to illustrate that you can't describe in your own words something that you don't truly understand. So that's why we love narration. We also love batch comparisons, where you make two versions with one pivotal difference and then taste them side by side. If you tasted these mashed potatoes made with russets versus Yukon Golds side by side, you would think they were different vegetables. If you're just doing a different one for each meal, you don't really pick up on that difference. And of course, experiments. But an experiment is not the same as an observation. So we think it's important to think like a scientist, engage in analytical food conversations, ask questions, predict outcomes, and analyze the unexpected. Even little kids, you could ask them, what do you think is going to happen? And they'll give you an answer. And then they can see if they're right and try to figure out if they were not correct. And finally, we encourage students to act like a scientist, to manage samples wisely, to use a control when it's appropriate, to only change one variable at a time, to measure time and temperature and ingredients accurately, take the time to preheat the oven, take the time to scoop and sweep your flour, and to keep good records, to take notes, to doodle pictures, and to take photos. Like our phones have become the greatest documentation tool ever. And there's no reason to not have really, really good records of what we've done in science. So there are a lot of resources out there that are inexpensive or that you can borrow from the library or available free online. So you don't have to invest a lot of money to try this out with your family. If you're sold on the idea and you're ready to jump in, but you just don't have the time or the desire to do it yourself, of course, we offer courses. We've got Inquisicook 1 and 2 are available. Those are for middle school and up. We've got Inquisicook Junior that's going into production in about 2 weeks. We do all the teaching. You don't have any books to buy. Each course has 75 self contained lessons. And we also have optional recipes that we call for further eating. We have video demonstrations of every recipe that students are asked to prepare. The platform is easy to use, easy to navigate. We also have all the instructor resources you need, so you will know what the marks have done this are, what the student's answers should be. We have all the answer keys. And if you want to check out the types of food your kids will be preparing, you can visit our recipe gallery and see just how crave-worthy science can be.
Well, this has been terrific. And one of the things that you said in the portion of presentation is that if we can bring as many senses to the table as possible, it increases our ability to retain and synthesize that material. And that is the hallmark of Demi Learning products. We seek to do that with all of our products. So this is sort of a little bit of a marriage made in heaven to be able to now extend that into science and the kitchen. What would you say is the most important thing for a parent to take away from our conversation?
Science is part of life. Practical science actually changes the way that you live. What happens in your kitchen matters. And having students who grow into adults who can cook what's on sale, what's in season, and what's in the fridge, uh, those are skills that will serve them for the rest of their lives. It will also make them more adaptable. We learned during COVID that we won't always have access to everything that we have access to today. And being able to pivot and use what you have on hand, it increases food security, it increases confidence, it makes you a better manager of your budget, and it just makes you a better steward on this earth.
Absolutely. I love everything that you said. Angela, tell us the website again so that we can go find this information.
Okay. It's inquisicook.com. That's with an S in the middle, not a Z. So it's basically inquisitive, only with cook instead of tiv. And we've got sample lessons. You can watch full length videos. We've got information on all the different recipes you'll prepare. You can kind of get a feel for us. And I hope that people have come away with this with a new enthusiasm for making cooking their ultimate applied science.
It has been such a pleasure to spend this hour with you. Thank you so much. I just have enjoyed it thoroughly.
It's been a delight, and I'm really thankful for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for today. I really appreciate it, and we'll look forward to hearing from you soon.
Thank you, Gretchen.
Take care.
Thanks again for joining us. We're glad to be a part of your educational community. You can help us grow our community even more by rating, reviewing, and subscribing to the show wherever you may be hearing this. Don't forget that you can access the show notes and watch a recording at demilearning.com/show or on our YouTube channel. We'll see you again next time. Until then, keep building strong foundations for lifelong learning.